All right. So, on topic today, why is this called a silent crisis? The main reason I think it's called a silent crisis is because people are just kind of they're pushing it off to the side and they're trying not to think about it. But here are some things that older people and seniors are going to be struggling with and are struggling with now and will be in the future. And the first one is lack of retirement savings. And used to be you could say, I'm going to go ahead and save 10% and have my Social Security and hopefully I had a job with a pension and I'm going to get by with all that. But you know what? I would say today that 10%, depending on how old you are, probably isn't enough. Now, if you're in your 20s and you save 10% up to the time you're 65, you may be okay depending on what your job is and how much you can save during that period of time. But for the average person, they're not going to really get serious about saving and getting a good retirement plan built probably until their mid 40s and going into their 50s. And then by then they got to really be aggressive about how much they're saving. And that comes to how involved you are in your retirement plan. If you go out and you seek, you get some software or you seek out a financial planner and get a plan built for you, then you can pretty aggressively save and hopefully take care of that. And the other thing is that we're living longer now. So it used to be you had to have a pot of money that was going to last you, 20, 25 years. Now you got to start thinking 30, 35 years because a lot of people are living into their 90s and pushing 100 now. And a lot of people are having to retire earlier than the full retirement age of 67. And with 45% of Americans retiring before they really want to because of health concerns, you got to be ready for that. The next one is pension plans. Back in the earlier generations, companies, instead of having 401ks, they put forth a pension plan. And a pension plan was a very reliable source of money that would come in every month and they didn't have to worry a whole lot about it. And, they just had that certain amount of money along with their Social Security most of the time. And they could just finance from month to month and be in pretty good shape. Well, nowadays you've got the 401k plan, which is a really good plan if you get started in it early, but it is subject to market volatility and it fluctuates. And so you've got to kind of stay on top of that. You can't just say I'm going to put it in, all in bonds and I'm going to be super conservative because it won't beat inflation. And if you stick it all in stocks, later on in life and it starts fluctuating that much, that sequence of return risk is really going to get to you. So you have to manage your own retirement. Even after you retire, and you take that money and you put it in an individual retirement account, you still have to manage it. And that's where you might want to go ahead and get a fiduciary, financial advisor to help you out with a retirement plan and an investment plan that you can be comfortable with. It's going to help ensure that you have money throughout your life. And this is one that's really hitting me harder than I thought it would, and that's healthcare costs. Yeah, as you get older, believe it or not, it's probably going to cost more to stay healthy. You need to stay up with all your routine, your colonoscopies and your eye exams, your hearing, your vision, all of that. You need to stay up with that. And it becomes more expensive as you get older because you have more things that are probably going to break down and go wrong. Now, hopefully they don't. Hopefully you stay very healthy. But in reality, healthcare costs are just going to be more. Now, your healthcare premiums, because of your age, are going to go up as well before you get to Medicare. Once you get to Medicare, those premiums kind of get a lot more reasonable than they do before that. But like I mentioned before, with 45% of Americans having to retire earlier than they want to, they're probably not reaching that age of 65 where they can get on Medicare. So healthcare costs are a huge burden, that you gotta take care of and you gotta be thinking of when you're talking about retirement. And one of the big ones that we all know could be coming if Congress doesn't act is Social Security funding. The Social Security funding is going to run out, and they're predicting by 2033 that we could have decreased benefits, because there are less young people that are paying into Social Security than the older generation, which is booming. The older generation is climbing, and it's climbing rapidly. So we got to be careful that we don't rely totally on Social Security, because it could be taking a pretty good haircut if Congress doesn't act and put more money into the funding of Social Security. If we go as is, like I say, it's going to be a pretty big haircut, and you can read up on that. And different people are going to say different things about how much. It's not like Social Security is going to go away, but it could be affected pretty drastically. Okay, and this kind of falls into one we talked about earlier. Because we're living longer, the long-term healthcare facilities are becoming more and more expensive. And what a lot of people don't realize is that your insurance plan and Medicare do not fully cover these long care facilities. No, they don't. Just because you have Medicare, if you have to go into assisted living, doesn't mean that Medicare is going to pay for that or all of it. They might pay for part of it, and they may pay for it for a certain amount of time. But if you have to be in assisted living for years, they're not going to pay for all that. And you're going to have to figure that out, how you're going to pay for that. Now, they do have insurance that you can purchase for long-term care, which I haven't looked into it personally. I'm going a different route. I'm going to go ahead and self-insure my long-term care. But if you do need it, there is insurance, but look into getting it and starting it before you're 65, because I've heard that once you reach 65, it gets pretty darn expensive. And inflation. Inflation can erode the purchasing power of your savings. Retirees living on a fixed income can really get in a bind, because inflation can take a big chunk of their money, and it devalues it. And we've seen that over the past few years, how much inflation has kind of devalued the dollar. So if you're on a fixed income, it can be pretty devastating to you, and it can derail your retirement if you're not careful. And like I've said in other videos also, if you have a nest egg, it's not enough to just save it. You have to invest it so it does keep up with inflation, or at least tries to keep up with inflation. So you know what? I hope this video's helped you. And if it has, reach down and hit that like button and watch this video next.